Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. The USDA believes U.S. farmers will plant 93.6 million acres of corn and 82.2 million acres of soybeans this spring, according to its prospective plantings report released Thursday morning. If realized, that would be the third highest planted acreage in corn since 1944. In its grain stocks report released at the same time, the agency tallied corn stocks up 1% from a year ago, but saw soybean stocks up 15%. We started by asking about the acre forecast when we talked with Jeff Thursday afternoon.
You know what, if it had been all about the acres, this would have been a pretty disappointing report, Jeff. But, you know, starting off, 93.6 million acres, that's a lot of corn. About 5.6 million more than last year, 6% more. And the interesting part, that was 3.6 million acres higher than what the average guess was. The range was pretty tight, 89 million acres to 91.5. Now, I know there was individuals out there in the industry looking for more acres than that, but that was a pretty narrow range for us to have on this type of report, definitely.
That soybean acreage of 82.2, is that a surprise at all?
You know, 82.2, you know, we were actually kind of thinking that we might see kind of a pullback on acres a little bit. Yeah, that was 414,000 acres lower than last year, 710,000 acres lower than what the guess was out there by the industry. So yeah, that was a lower number. What's really interesting as we dig into those numbers though, and starting first on beans, if we take a look at the state by states, looks like Nebraska is going to remain unchanged, and that's one of the few out there that's going to do that. The big increase is going to come out of Missouri. They're going to add about 1 million acres. That's to be expected, though. I think the big thing there is the fact that they had a lot of prevent plant last year, so that did bring in a lot of acres there. Over on the corn, I didn't touch on this, but you know, some interesting things going on there, about 300,000 more acres for Nebraska. Some big changes, though, coming out of North Dakota and Kansas, 650,000 acres. Those are some big additions, in addition to Iowa at 400,000, Illinois at 400,000, so there's some big hitters adding quite a few acres.
Yeah, we'll talk about maybe some possible switching and the price implications a little bit later on, but let's talk about stocks now. So you thought that was not necessarily quite as negative as the acreage report?
No, it wasn't. As a matter of fact, if we would have just had a stocks report today, Jeff, we'd have been sitting here higher on both corn and beans because of it. If we kind of dig into the stocks, we have to realize this is all based off of surveys. So they surveyed the elevators, they surveyed the farmers, and we came in at 7.81 billion bushels of corn. If we kind of put that in perspective, that's only about 1% higher than last year. As we dig into those numbers deeper, though, what we find is there's about 1% less corn on the farm than there was a year ago, about 3% more in the elevators. Nebraska's holding quite a bit, though. Nebraska's got about 16% more. So we're going to have to keep that in mind as we go on down the road and think about the basis implications. As we go back in time and say, well, when was the last time we had this high amount of stocks? We'd have to go back to 1987 since we've had this many stocks for this time of year.
If you just look at that on its face, that seems extremely bearish, right?
Well, it does, but we got to put that in perspective. I didn't go ahead and convert that over and compare that to the demand side, but overall I would say that's all kind of old news. That's all kind of built into the market. What it really tells us is we have enough corn stocks to kind of keep a lid on the market, but if we have a weather problem, even with what we ended up seeing today from the acre side, corn can still move higher.
What about soybeans, up 15% from a year ago?
Yeah, that's a big jump, isn't it? As we come in at 1.53 billion. You know, as you dig into those, you only got to go back to 2007, so you don't go back so far in time to find the last time we were at those areas. And as you take a closer look at those numbers, really what we end up finding, Nebraska, about 9% more. There's about 19% more nationally out on the farm, about 12% more is actually sitting there in the elevators than a year ago. So what it shows, the farmer held on to more bushels last year. The other thing we look at from this side on the stocks is we always want to look at the demand side. And for this last quarter, what we found is that on corn, it was down about 0.8%, the disappearance compared to a year ago. Beans was down about 1% compared to a year ago. So what that tells us is that compared to USDA numbers, their numbers are pretty good right now. We don't foresee any adjustments probably needed yet on the demand side, at least according to these stock numbers.
So walk me through, as you take these numbers and you put them on the balance sheet, kind of walk me through how that looks now.
Yeah, and that's the first thing we did. That's exactly. As we got these numbers, we start plugging that in because we need to try to figure out where does it look like we end up going for prices this fall. Now, USDA won't be out with their official numbers till May, and that'll be the first time they'll report on the 2016 crop year. But what we did is we took the 93.6 million acres, we put a 168 yield on that, which is we think about what USDA will come out with. We then used their demand numbers from the Outlook meeting, and we arrived at a 2.6 billion bushel carryout. Now at face value, that's a big number, and as that number gets published out there, what you'll find is you'll see people talking, we haven't been that high a number going back in the late 80s. But when you put it in perspective and you say what's the stocks to use, so you divide that by demand, last time we were at this kind of level is about 2004, okay? Now what does that mean for price? Let's walk back to the harvest of 2014. At that time, USDA was looking at 2 billion bushels. The industry was thinking about 2.3 billion. Corn that fall for December futures of 14 traded down to 318. Now it was supported a little bit because of the tight beans. We basically ran out of beans that fall. Probably should have traded down to about 310. We think if we had that same situation happening now with these type of stocks and everything where beans are at, we think we'd probably trade $2.75 to $3 on the corn side.
So where's the reason for hope?
Well, the reason for hope here, I think, is the fact that there's a long season ahead of us. We think that this is going to end up ultimately being the biggest corn number that's going to get thrown out there. We think it's probably the smallest bean number. A couple reasons for that. We know that planting's going a little slow in the south. That could switch some acres from corn over to the bean side, so we think we could see a shift there yet. We also can't forget we could potentially have some weather problems because of El Nino, and it could happen in two ways. It could happen because we could still be a little bit too wet early and the plant doesn't get going quite as fast, and we could still bring back some heat later on in the season. So I wouldn't give up hope yet on these markets, Jeff.
Is there anyone that looks at this and says, and we're taping on Thursday, so I don't know what's going to happen on Friday yet, but looks at this and says maybe this is a buying opportunity specifically in corn?
I think there is, because what we have to really think about here is that longer term, I do believe if these conditions pan out, we will be lower on price. We gave you those projections. But ultimately in the short term, what we have to realize is that the market does the adjustment, pretty big adjustment today. But then from there, this is all factored in and we're looking ahead to see what else is coming down the road. Yeah, so I think you will see some people out there that will start saying, hey, we're going to find some support here. Maybe you should buy it here and look for some higher prices down the road.